with me for a second here as I prepare to go live on Getter, which is something that I'm working diligently on, and to see if I can get that to happen. There we go live. We are live on Getter. Thank you very much. Okay, so normally I do a sort of a political, social commentary program. I'm not going to in any way deny, not that I need to, that right now I'm a little bit out of the loop in terms of what's going on in politics. I'm in sort of a vacation mode, if you will. And but I'm also doing a little homework. I'm studying for a degree in sociology at Bunker Hill Community College. At my old age, I have decided to get a degree, and it's interesting. One of the courses I'm taking this summer is in American literature. And I read a poem as part of my class that I thought was amazing. And it's something that I want to discuss right now because I think it has great import in terms of what is going on in this country today. This is a poem by Phyllis Wheatley. The poem is called His Excellency George Washington. Let me give a little background on Phyllis Wheatley, 1753, 1784. So we're talking American Revolutionary period here. Born in Senegal in 1753, Phyllis Wheatley was seized from her homeland at a young age and brought to Boston as a slave in 1761. Despite her enslavement, Wheatley carefully studied the classic poets from Homer to Milton, learned Latin, and published her first poem in 1767. She began to receive critical attention in 1770, though she was not freed until 1774. Despite her initial success, she died alone and nearly forgotten in 1784, having long struggled to survive in a segregated country, especially after the hard times that followed the war. These conditions, paired with her deeply religious and patriotic poetry, embody the contradictions of America during the Revolutionary period. The land of the free was still dependent on the enslavement and subjugation of so many. Now, I want to talk specifically here about her poem, His Excellency George Washington. After Washington took the role of commander-in-chief for the colonial armies, independence had not yet been declared, but the conflict was already underway. As a Boston resident at that early stage of the war, hit close to home, and she even had to leave the city for a time. Consider her perspective. Okay, now let me get to the poem. This is absolutely amazing. Let me talk about why it's amazing before I get to the poem. Phyllis Wheatley became internationally famous at a time when the city of Boston, the colonial Boston, my hometown, was basically being occupied by British forces under General Gage. Now, Boston, this occupation, which happened a year before, I think even 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, and as a result of the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre, Boston Massacre was part of it. This was not an easy time in Boston. This was a time that was, this is a brutal occupation where people were being hanged regularly on the Boston Common, where the British were mustering troops on the Boston Common and occupying businesses at will. They were seizing churches, burning churches, seizing homes. It was a very dangerous time in Boston. In fact, some of the patriots, particularly people like Paul Revere and James Otis and Dr. Warren and others, these are incredible people. They actually built a network of tunnels in the North End, what's called the North End today. It's where the Old North Church is. So they could communicate and they could conduct meetings and plan during this occupation period. Phyllis Wheatley was a resident of Boston at that time. I think she was a freed person, freed from enslavement, and she had to leave the city probably because of her poetry and because she was associated so strongly as a patriot. I would also add that Phyllis Wheatley's poem is an expression of deep Christian faith. She was a Calvinist, and she was a person who believed that God played a role in the universe and that God had a predetermined role. And she wanted General Washington, whom she revered, to wake up and realize the importance of this role. I've also discovered a letter that General George Washington wrote to her in 1776, in the middle of the war, when he had a lot going on, thanking her and praising her for this poem, which I think is a significant thing, especially given the fact that she was an African American. Now, let me just briefly read a little bit from the poem. This is His Excellency George Washington. Celestial choir, enthroned in realms of light, Columbia's scenes of glorious toils I write, while freedom's cause her anxious breast alarms, she flashes dreadful in refulgent arms. See Mother Earth her offspring's fate beknown, and nations gaze at scenes before unknown. See the bright beams of heaven's revolving light, involved in sorrows and the veil of night. The goddess comes, she moves divinely fair. Olive and laurel binds her golden hair. Whenever shines this native of the skies, unnumbered charms and recent graces rise. Muse, bow propitious while my pen relates how pour her arms through 1,000 gates, as when Elis heaven's fair face deforms, and wrapped in tempest and a night of storms. Astonished ocean feels the wild uproar. The refluent surges beat the sounding shore. Or think as leaves in autumn's golden rain, such and so many moves the warrior's train. In bright array they seek the work of war, where high unfurled the ensign waves in air. Shall I to Washington their praise recite? Enough thou knowst them in the fields of fight. Thee, first in person and honors, we demand the grace and glory of thy marital band. Fame for thy valor, for thy virtues more. Hear every tongue thy guardian aid implore. 1 century scare performed its destined round, when Gallic powers Columbia's fury found. And so may you, whomever dared disgrace the land of freedom's heaven-defended race. Fixed are the eyes of nations in the scales, for in their hopes Columbia's arm prevails. Anon, Britannia, droops the pensive head, while round increase the rising hills of dead. Ah, cruel blindness to Columbia's state, lament thy thirst for boundless power, too late. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let goddess guide, a crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfading, Washington, be thine. Now, the significance here is that she is saying that Washington is guided by divine powers, and that she makes reference to the race that Washington represented. But when she talks about race, she's not talking about conventional definitions of race, Black, white, Asian, whatever. She's talking about the race of Americans, of patriots, standing up against the British invasion. And she's saying that God had endowed this race, that being Americans, with powers to create this new free entity that was divinely inspired. This is an extraordinarily both patriotic and religious statement. And I think that it's something that, I hope that it becomes more well-known amongst Americans, particularly amongst African Americans, because I think that Phyllis Wheatley could be viewed as a major figure, an underrated figure, an important figure in not only the emergence of African American patriotism toward America at a time when Black people were suffering under the cruel and sweltering yoke of slavery. There's nothing more evil in history, in my opinion. But yet, nevertheless, this idea that this patriotic movement would portend an era of freedom. And secondly, that I think Phyllis Wheatley played a major role in the development of what we now have as the Black church. She was a Calvinist, she was a Protestant, and I think that her ideas of predestination and of God's grace and of God's gifts is something that has basically permeated the Black church for the better, because I think that the Black church, probably more than any other institution in America, has inspired this country and that has redefined and re-enlightened the white church and of all religions in America. So I just wanted to share this poem today. It's very inspiring. And I hope that it leads to some thinking on the part of all of us in terms of the importance of Black patriotism and Black faith. Again, the poem is called His Excellency General Washington. I just want to read the last piece here again to reiterate. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side, thy every action let the goddess guide, a crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine, with gold unfurling, Washington be thine. Anyway, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. I shall return with more current events as soon as I'm able to. And have a great day. God bless you all. God bless America.